conceived by Théophile Gautier, seen here on the left, as a vehicle for Carlotta Grisi on the right, a young dancer who had recently made her debut at the Paris Opera. Gautier was smitten by Carlotta and was interested in creating something that would show her off to her best advantage. But Gautier was a journalist and a poet, one of the young romantic poets of the period, and he had the good sense, however, to turn to a dramatist, Jules-Henri Verneuil de Saint-Georges, for help in turning his idea for the ballet into a workable dramatic plot. They commissioned Adolphe Adam, already a successful composer of ballet and opera scores, to do the music. But also involved in the original conception was Jules Perrault, the foremost male dancer of the period. That's Jules Perrault in the center. Perrault was known as the male Taglioni. He was a hugely accomplished performer and very popular. But a number of years earlier, he had negotiated himself right out of a contract at the Paris Opera by making demands that the opera considered to be, monetary demands that the opera considered to be excessive. And Carlotta Grisi was Perrault's protege and his unofficial wife. So with the libretto and music in hand, these collaborators convinced the Paris Opera to take on their project. But the opera already had a male dancer, a very fine male dancer, and a choreographer under contract. So although they agreed to mount Giselle, the male lead went to Lucien Petipa, and the choreography was given to Jean Corelli, the in-house choreographer who can be seen on the left. Nevertheless, Perrault managed to finagle for himself the right to choreograph all the parts that involved Carlotta. And since she was to play the title role, that meant he ended up choreographing large parts of the ballet. Perrault was not paid for this work. He knew he wouldn't be paid for it. And in fact, he would receive no official credit at all for the work that he did. So we have to ask ourselves, well, why would he do it? Well, on the one hand, he felt that he knew best how to choreograph for Carlotta. But perhaps more importantly, Perrault very much regretted the fact that he'd lost his contract at the Paris Opera, and he was probably hoping that if Giselle was a success, there'd be some future consideration to come. So a ballet that from the very beginning had two choreographers, Corelli and Perrault. But notwithstanding the immediate success of Giselle, Perrault was not only not paid or given any official credit, he also did not receive any other consideration from the opera. So shortly after the ballet's premiere, Perrault left for London, and somewhat bitter at his treatment in Paris, remounted the ballet in London without any reference at all to Corelli. Perrault would go on to have a very successful career as a choreographer in England and later in Russia, where he again restaged Giselle. Many years later, after Perrault left Russia, Marius Petipa, who had been his assistant in Russia, became the ballet master-in-chief at the Russian Imperial Theater, and Petipa reworked and revised the ballet many times over 3 decades, making substantial changes to it and putting his own personal mark on it. Now, long after the ballet had been forgotten, had dropped out of the repertoire in Western Europe, it remained alive in Russia, only returning to Paris at the beginning of the 20th century with Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. And it again regained its popularity and spread all over the world. So in fact, this ballet has been an active repertoire somewhere in the world since its inception in 1841. Now, in spite of the 3 choreographers and a significant number of changes that have been made over the years to the ballet that reflected the artistry of different dancers, changes in technique, changing tastes, and even local political conditions, most productions have remained true to the original essence of the ballet. Just before leaving these choreographers, I wanted to show you another slide of Perrault, because many of you may not realize that you are familiar with his image. Perrault ended his career back in Paris as a teacher at the Paris Opera. And he was there when Degas was doing all of his dance works. And he appears in a number of Degas' work. And that's Perrault there, the gray-haired man, leading the class at the Paris Opera. So Giselle, the ballet. It tells the story of a young peasant girl, Giselle, who's fallen in love with a young man who she believes to be a peasant like her. He loves her in return and has led her to believe that he intends to marry her. In fact, he is Prince Albrecht, and he is already engaged to a countess. His rival, the local gamekeeper, Hilarion, also loves Giselle, and Hilarion begins to suspect that this fellow isn't who he claims to be. And eventually, Hilarion uncovers the truth and exposes Albrecht. And the realization that Albrecht has lied to her and betrayed her causes Giselle to go mad. And at the end of the first act, she dies. Act 2, which is the part that the school is presenting, is the last act of the ballet. It is set in a forest clearing where Giselle is buried. Her grave, which can be seen on the left-hand side of the stage, is marked by a cross. Now, one of the changes that occurred to Giselle over the years was centered around the question of exactly how she died. And in the original, she committed suicide, and that's why she was buried not in a cemetery, but in a lone plot in the forest. The cause of her death would change over the years. One of those changes that had to be made based on local conditions. So she's buried in the forest, and her grave marked by a cross. Act 2, however, is dominated by Willies. And Willies are the spirits of young girls who were betrayed in love and died before they were wed. Willies are vengeful spirits who appear at night and prey on any men they find in the forest. Giselle is going to be called from the grave by Myrta, the queen of the Willies, and she's going to be initiated into this sisterhood of spirits. In the act, Hilarion will be trapped and killed by the Willies, forced to dance until he's so weak that they're able to throw him in the lake and drown him. They will also capture Albrecht, and he too will be forced to dance. But Giselle, who we will learn still loves him and has forgiven him, will dance with him to help give him strength and keep him going until dawn, when the Willies lose their strength and have to return to their graves until the next night. Now, in the time that I have, what I intend to do is use some brief clips from Act 2 to draw your attention to a few critical moments in the unfolding of the plot. I'm going to be using footage from the CBC's 1976 televised production of Giselle, produced and directed by Norman Campbell, and featuring Karen Kane and Frank Augustine as Giselle and Albrecht, and Nadia Potts as Myrta, Queen of the Willies. We here at the school are very grateful to the CBC for allowing us to use these excerpts from this historic production that is still available from the CBC on DVD. Now, at the beginning of Act 2, night is falling, and Hilarion is seen mourning at Giselle's grave. But he's going to hear the bells chiming, announcing midnight, and he's going to flee for fear of the Willies. And then a veiled Myrta will appear, and she will slowly and carefully circle the stage and traverse back and forth over it. And what she is doing is marking out her territory. She's marking out her realm and the magic ground where she will exercise her evil power. Then she'll call the Willies, and they'll appear at her command and curtsy before their queen. Then she'll call her attendants, Zmoina and Zulma, and they too will appear at her command and acknowledge her authority. But the choreography goes even further in establishing Myrta's power. So I'm going to show this clip here. What you'll see at the center is Myrta, the queen, surrounded by her Willies. And watch carefully, because what the choreographer is doing here is showing you that she has power and control over the Willies. So watch what happens. They bow to her. She raises her arms and they come up. She lowers her arms and they go down. Okay, I have to stop it in the middle of, it bothers me to stop in the middle of a musical phrase, but if I waited till the phrase was over, we wouldn't get through everything that we need to do. So it was really important that we believe that she has control over these willies. And of course, all these moments that I've described up till now, Myrtha commanding the willies to come and they're bowing to her, etc., are interspersed with lots of dancing. But they set up within the dancing the parameters of the drama that is about to unfold. And shortly after this, you will hear excitement building up in the music. The willies are getting excited because once having called her whole court together, Myrtha is going to summon Giselle from her grave and initiate her as a willie. And we, the members of the audience, are ready to believe that she has the power to do this because we've already seen her exercise it over the other willies. Giselle has just risen from her grave. She comes out of her grave wearing a shroud. And watch what happens. So Myrtha backs up and she draws Giselle into the center of her territory, then tells her to stop. She tells her to move forward, and then she tells her to stop. And then she's going to snatch her shroud off, and Giselle is going to start to spin in a frenzy as she becomes a willie. Is full of these jumps that keep Giselle in the air. Okay. After this initiation, the willies are going to, Myrtha will hear people in the forest, and the willies will disperse in search of their prey and go off looking for men upon whom they can take their revenge. But the next thing that we will see is Albrecht. And Albrecht arrives in the clearing looking for Giselle's grave. He's come to place flowers there. And deeply remorseful over what has occurred, he'll kneel down beside the grave. And he'll be kneeling there when he starts to sense the presence of Giselle. Now, he thinks she's buried in the ground, but he can kind of feel her presence around him. And she's going to flit about and hover over him. Remember, she's a willie now. And at first, Albrecht is confused. He's not sure whether he has seen her or not. And eventually, what she's going to do is she's going to throw some flowers at him as concrete proof of her presence. And slowly she will kind of materialize and become a real presence to him. And when they finally dance together, it will become clear through her tenderness that she has forgiven him and she still loves him. And after these tender moments, they leave. And the next thing we see are the willies who come rushing back, because they've captured Hilarion, and they kill him. And having, as it were, tasted blood, tasted the revenge of killing him, they work themselves up into an even greater frenzy, and all of this is telegraphed to us in the music. And they head off to find more prey. And when they return, this time they have Albrecht. And in this next video excerpt that I'm going to show you, Myrtha, they've caught him, and Myrtha is about to exercise her authority over him. But what's going to happen is Giselle will come running in, and she'll tell him to run back to the cross, to the grave, because the sacred symbol of the cross will protect him from Myrtha. Here Here we go. So they've got him. You can hear that excitement building in the music. So she motions him back to the cross. And you'll see that Myrta cowers in the presence of the sacred symbol, as do all the other Willies of her court. But Myrta's cunning. She has the power to order Giselle to move. So she orders Giselle to move into the center of her territory, knowing, and to start to dance, knowing that Albrecht won't be able to resist moving in to dance with her. So she draws her in. We've already seen her do this. What ensues is a beautiful, beautiful, poignant pas de deux. But the problem is, Albrecht has moved away from the protection of the cross, and he has come back into the power of Myrta. And once she has control over him again, she will order him to dance to his death. But what's going to happen is that Giselle will dance with him to help him keep up his strength. And each time he falters, she'll encourage him and keep him going. So just look at this next thing. He's already fallen, and watch what happens. And here, it's as if she's calling him, saying, get up, you know, keep going. Okay. Among all this will be much pleading on Albrecht's behalf. They will ask Myrta for mercy, they'll ask the Willies for mercy, and of course, always refused. And they will continue to force him to dance until he finally collapses. But as he collapses, we hear in the music the ringing of the bells that mark dawn. And with dawn, the Willies lose their power, and they start to recede backwards and disappear. And Giselle will also have to return to her grave. But before she does, she helps Albrecht up, and they have these last heartbreaking moments together before she disappears. For the bells. You can see that the Willies are hiding their faces from the light as the sun comes up. The Willies and Myrta start to drift away into the background, and they will just disappear. And Giselle helps him up. Okay. They'll have these last few touching moments together, but then she too will disappear, leaving Albrecht bereft and alone on the stage. Her love has saved him, and having forgiven him, she has freed herself from the power of Myrta, and no longer a Willie, Giselle will at last be able to rest in peace. So a moving story about the power of love and forgiveness. Also, I think, a moving story about the limits of love and forgiveness. Act 2 contains powerful dancing for Myrta, the queen, beautiful, poignant dancing for Giselle and Albrecht, and very dynamic dancing for the corps de ballet that plays a crucial part in telling this story. And once you've seen it, I think you'll understand why it has survived so long. After the premiere in 1841, Gautier, who had the original idea for Giselle, wrote that Giselle has conquered Paris. The pale and shadowy figures of the Willies have received a reception undreamed of. This is a ballet that will last as long as there is beauty.